Hello and welcome to Full Disclosure, a podcast project conceived entirely to let me spend more time with interesting people than I would ever get on the radio show. Angela Hartnett, Michelin-starred chef, restaurateur, raconteur, broadcaster, bon viveur. Welcome.
Any
I don't know if you know this, and I don't know if I should begin the interview by telling you, but you were a pointless answer on Pointless earlier this week.
Was I?
Not you personally,
yeah.
But it was a question about which of these are restaurants run by celebrity chefs.
Oh.
And you win the prize if it's a pointless answer that's correct.
Right, okay.
And Murano came in as a pointless answer.
So I'm now considered a celebrity chef.
Do you consider yourself a celebrity chef?
No, because I can't stand the celebrity side of it, if I'm honest. I get why I do TV and all the rest of it. You do it to fill your restaurants and stuff, but I don't like that idea of that you're suddenly in this stratosphere of being on everyone's, breakfast table sort of thing.
Does it work? Do you think as your profile rises, you get people in your...
Yeah, I think when you do certain programmes, you do something like Saturday Kitchen, you do Great British Menu, you see the bookings go and go and go.
Right.
They do, and they'll help you sell books and all the rest of it. But I don't think... But then, having said that, there's thousands of restaurants that do very well without any chef being known or any owner being known. So, it's up and down, isn't it? I don't think. Do a good product and you should be all right.
Well, because really you need them to come back.
Yes, exactly. Get them through the doors, one thing. Exactly. Making them come back is very different. Yeah.
It's like everything else.
Yeah.
So the story begins in 1968. I love the idea of an Italian mother and an Irish father, because that arguably, I don't want to upset you, that would be arguably Europe's finest cuisine.
Oh, the worst.
On the one hand, versus Europe's least celebrated, celebrated cuisine. So I presume that cooking at home lent much more towards Italy than it did towards Ireland.
Yeah, it certainly did. Yeah, and I think my mother's wedding photo is probably the best. They're on a sort of angle like that, where you've got all the Irish going down to all the shorter Italians, all in hats, all with cigarettes. It was that era, wasn't it? And they all got married in their 50s and stuff.
How did they meet?
They met through my mum doing some cookery course. She did a cookery course with my father's sister, and then she got introduced to my dad. But for their generation, they were both late people who got married. They didn't get married into their 30s,
right.
Which, for those in the 50s and 60s was late. So they enjoyed their life and had fun, and then got married and had 3 kids. Yeah.
Were you conscious of having older parents when you were little?
Not so much. Not until, I think, unfortunately, my father died when I was nearly 8. And I wasn't conscious until my sister, there was a big gap between her and myself and my brother. She's 7 years younger than me. And then we were looking after her, and then my mum would go to school and people go, "Oh, is that your granny?" sometimes.
Okay.
But then, and it was only then, but then it's never bothered me. It really hasn't, because my mum's brilliant and I love her. So what does it matter?
Your dad was a sailor.
Yeah.
He was in the Merchant Navy. So he'd been around the world.
And also he was away a lot. And it sounds quite bizarre, but, not you. Of course you miss your father and you never want anything to happen. But, he wasn't around a lot of the time.
Right.
So it was an easier adjustment to having someone who was there night and day all the time. So hard for my mum. I mean, she had 3 kids under the age of 10.
Yes, and she became a dinner lady.
Yeah, no, she was brilliant. She did everything, Mum. She worked in shops, she dinner lady, she trained as a nanny, and she was a phenomenal cook, yeah.
How did her parents end up in Ferndale, in South Wales?
So they were the First World War generation of Italians after the First World War that came over to this country. You had some come to London, some to Wales, some to Scotland, and it was the real, as you've talked about it many times, that sort of immigrant story that one person comes, then they bring their brother, who brings his wife, who brings their cousin, who brings the sister, and then suddenly you have literally a village go from one area of Italy to South Wales, and that's it. And when you go back to Italy, and I've joked about this many times, you go back to this tiny village up in the northern Italy, and you hear Welsh accents. People will be there going, "All right, Angela's your mother," and everyone's like, "What's going on?" Well, that's bizarre, but that's it. And and now and that's the story. And then of course you move to people. So that's why in that part of Wales there's so many Welsh Italians.
And how conscious were you of your dual sort of identity when you were growing
Not
up?
probably until my teens, I think, because then I'd notice it's the silly things, isn't it? Mum used to make this thing called torta di patata, which is basically a potato cake, and that would be in my packed lunchbox.
That's how to win an Irish
Yeah,
man's heart.
exactly. Yeah, and so that was different for anyone else who had a tuna and sweet corn sandwich. So
Yes.
it was those silly things. But I knew we were because we'd go back to Italy. We were lucky, and we were also of that sort of my mum. As I said earlier, she was widowed young, so we would be sent off. We would literally like go and stay with your aunts and go and have 3 weeks in Italy with them, so I can have a bit of peace from 3 kids, sort of thing.
So quite a cosmopolitan childhood.
we're
That
quite
fact that
lucky,
you were
yeah.
hopping up between England and
Yeah.
and Italy. Did your mum speak Italian at home?
She never
at all?
did. She
No.
was terrible. But I learnt it later in life. I mean, I'm okay. I get by. I can order food, which is probably the main thing, and know where to go left and right. Yeah.
So when did food become a big thing for you? Was it a big thing at home or
It was always, I think the two things that made it a big thing at home was the fact that we sat around the table as a family. That was important from the Irish and the Italian side. That was a given. And we ate good food, and we never thought of it as foodie.
Right.
My grandmother she always said she bought the best she could afford.
So she was around a lot.
She was around a lot. She lived up the road from us, and so because she ended up moving up to Essex, so we all grew up there. So she was around a lot, and she was a great cook, and she made everything fresh. And she taught me that, you know, if things weren't right when I went shopping, she'd send me back up the road to take it back, you know. And as a 12-year-old, like if I bought a carrots that was suddenly soft, you know, she would like, well, that's not right, back up the road, and I'd have to. And I was too embarrassed. I'd just spend my pocket money and buy
your own carrots and chuck the other ones away.
And then I learnt very early the value of, you know, good food, and you know, if you're spending hard earned money. And also, as I said before, it's the war generation. You know, she never threw anything away. There was no waste in her kitchen. Everything. Povero, yeah, kitchen povero. But you know, you'd go in her fridge and there'd just be, you know, little bowls with a saucer covering something delicious, because nothing was wasted, even a tiny little bit of sugo. So that's what I learned about the value of food. And the main thing I think was always, my mum was, you know, fanatical about, we sat down as a family. You know, we always did breakfast at the weekend. Even if my brother and I were going off to things, we had to have dinner together, and then we went off, you know. And that to this day I think is so important. I'm a bit old fashioned like that, but I believe in it.
Are you still like that with the not throwing stuff away?
Very much not throwing stuff away, especially owning restaurants, and the same at home. I mean, to the point, yeah. I mean, we laugh, and we have these thing called freezer parties, because I sort of throw things in a freezer and then don't remember what it is or haven't labelled it. So then take it all out, realise what it is, and then cook a meal out of it. Because I don't think we should.
It's one of the maddest statistics, isn't it?
Yeah.
Particularly when you're talking about a cost of living crisis every other day.
It's crazy.
And you read, we throw away a third of the fresh food that we buy. Or
maybe
it's linked to what you just described about provenance. The idea that it's not not a modern British thing to be looking at the food and saying that's a bit, you know, to be in the shop and saying I won't take that, but I will take this. It's quite normal in continental Europe to behave like that. I used to I spent a lot of time with a Greek family, and when the dad came over here, he used to start giggling in supermarkets because all the tomatoes were identical, and he'd never seen anything like that before in his life. Everything. So maybe because we don't show the care in that direction, we're more likely to throw it away in that direction.
We're frivolous about it.
Yes.
And also, I think the other thing we do wrong here is everything's readily available all year round. I think that's our biggest thing. And I think if we really want to do anything about food waste, we need to really say, this is what you have in this season. That's it. We're not going to fly anything from Peru. We're not going to fly, you know, it shouldn't be. And therefore, you don't have it at that time of year. And you would be more careful and appreciate it more if you knew you only got strawberries for those 10 weeks of the year, not all year round.
How faithfully does the menu at Murano reflect that belief?
Murano pretty faithfully. At home it doesn't always. I mean, I always have constant arguments with my husband, because I'll go and I'll just quickly grab something off the shelf and he'll look at it and go, no, we're not buying that. That's being like, put it back. It's got
worse since Brexit as well.
Oh God, it's terrible.
They have to go to Peru to get something that they might have got in Holland not long ago.
It's ridiculous. And I can be equally guilty of that personally, but I'd like to think the restaurants we try and keep on it at least. Yeah.
And would you help in the kitchen? Would you?
Yeah, definitely. It was also that very patriarchal, whatever. The woman always helped. So my brother was older than me, 2 years older.
Okay.
He didn't really need to help anything. He was just my brother, whereas I always had to help. But I didn't mind. I loved doing stuff with my grandmother, and I loved doing it with my mum, and I learnt so much from her. So for me, it never bothered me. But it was definitely, my grandmother used to make this thing. We used to make it, we still do every Christmas, called annolini, which is this lovely little pasta in broth. And my brother ended up working in Tokyo for 5 years, and she'd always make loads, and we'd put it in the freezer, and if people weren't around, it would be saved for them. And I remember one March after Christmas, going like 3 months out, I said, "Oh, Mark, no, come on, can we have these annolini?" "No, they're for your brother." I'm like, he's like thousands of miles away. He's never made them in his life. Why can't I? So it was like that sort of look after the eldest son.
It's an act of love.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, I think food in lots of ways is an act of love.
And yet that is not a commonplace perspective in most British families.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we never did as kids was watch TV and eat food. Okay. Which I think, again, is something I do it probably more now as an adult at home if I'm, sitting there having a supper. Whereas we never did it as a child. Even if it was me and my grandmother, we sat together, both of us at a table, and ate our dinner.
You mentioned losing your dad when you were 7, and you've already explained why perhaps it didn't have as profound an effect upon you as it would have done if he'd been around a lot. But it sounds, from the way you talk about it, like a close to idyllic childhood in many other ways. Yeah,
in lots of great. My mum was brilliant,
Both sets of grandparents were around, I think.
No, just the females,
okay.
The mothers. Yeah, both fathers, both fathers.
So both grandmas were there. Yeah. So Nonna. Would it be Nonna
and Grandma. Granny Hartnett. Granny Hartnett and Nonna. And also, I think what both my mum and father had was very tight siblings.
Okay.
They both came from families of 4 siblings, and they were tight, and they helped, and again, is it different these days? I don't know, but they all pull together.
They're quite Irish and Italian traits, though.
Yeah, I think so.
So you might not have the cuisine in common, but they've got the Catholicism.
God, from one Catholic to another, I know.
Well, let's go to primary school then first. What were you like? Did you like going to school?
I liked going to school. I wasn't the most academic. My brother was the one that was really the smart one, and my sister got it. But I liked it, and I was okay. I was middle of the road. And then Michael went off. We grew up in Kent before we moved to Essex. He went off to a grammar school, and we were still a generation of the 11 plus. I went off to a comprehensive, and then we both moved up to Essex. And then he ended up going to a comprehensive, and I went to a convent school, because, the Catholicism side of it. So, but I like school. Some of my oldest friends are still my school friends.
Oh, that's nice.
It was never a chore for me. It was fun. It was an all-girls Catholic. Well, the primary school was mixed, and there was an all-girls Catholic convent, and it was just fun. It was easy. It wasn't, I never felt like I hated it.
What were you good at?
I was good at home economics.
That doesn't count.
I liked English and I loved history. I was rubbish at maths. I really was, and I had to get extra lessons. I liked history and I liked English, therefore I was reasonably good at it. And I loved reading. And I think that's a big regret with my life now. I don't read like I used to. I remember as a kid, I would always be reading. And my mum couldn't understand how I was such a bad speller. She says, your head is always in a book. But I think I am slightly dyslexic. Right. But now I just watch Netflix, which is terrible. So I've got to sort myself out and start reading.
It feeds almost the same part of your brain, doesn't it? And it's not like junk food.
No,
some of the stuff on Netflix.
No, not everything.
Quite nourishing. Have you watched one day yet? Have you watched
No, good.
I've got 2 left. It's so good. It's so good. You mentioned your schooling in Upminster at the Sacred Heart of Mary Girls' School as being like an Enid Blyton book. So you mean a bit Jolly Hockey Stick?
It was easy. We were very innocent, I think. We'd have the odd cigarette. We'd go to a dance where the boys would be in one, or a disco, boys in one corner, us in another corner. It was very easy. It wasn't I suppose it was a nice time in life. I don't think there was no social media. There's no phone. No. You went out and you sat in a park and you talked to your mates, and that was about as difficult or as hard as it got. It feels probably a bit pathetic, but actually, I think I look back and I think, God, I don't want to be a child now.
No, I don't
the pressures they have and everything.
Yeah, you're right.
We could walk home. We didn't feel our parents had to monitor us and watch us on our phone. How we were getting home.
The parents weren't panicking when they didn't know where you were, so it's harder for the parent as well as harder for the child.
It was a much easier way, and we all all worked. I had a paper round. Then, I mean, we all had different jobs in different places, and you all earned your money. That's how you did stuff.
So if I'd met you then, so let's say O-level year when you were 16, and I said, what do you want to do when you grow up? What would you have said?
Oh, then I was dreaming. I wanted to be everything. Anything I watched, I'd watch the Olympics, because you remember Seb Coe and Steve Cram, and I wanted to be a runner. I'd watch the, Boris Becker, I want to be a tennis. I'd want anything I saw that I thought, that looks good, I'd like to be it. But I ended up, I think it was when I went to sixth form, or when I stayed on at sixth form before I went off to uni, I thought I want to run a restaurant.
Oh, really?
I did sort of say I want to cook. And my mum had said to me, go to France, really learn your trade. And I said, no, I'm going to waste another 3 years and go off and do history at Cambridge Poly. So I did that instead.
But you did a year in Italy first, I think, as an au pair.
Yeah, exactly.
Was that formative or just fun?
Made me learn Italian really well.
Right, that's good then.
That was a good thing. And the family never spoke English. I didn't speak enough Italian, so you formed it, and that was a great thing. So I love doing that. And I genuinely now believe, and if any youngsters come to me at like 16 or their parents say, they want to start, I said, just go and do something first. Don't go into a kitchen so young.
Right.
Either do your education or go and travel or go and work. Then come into in your 20s. Because I think it's really young to be doing big hours and all the rest of it.
Because it's a physical and mental.
Yeah, exactly.
Strain.
Go and see the world. Why not?
We'll work our way towards that moment in your life. But to focus, so really from A-levels, you knew.
Yeah, I think so. Never in my wildest imagination would think that the world would become like it has about food.
Right.
Who would think that, on the cover of Time, you've got chefs,
Yes.
they're going to the White House, these ludicrous things that happen these days.
Who would you have said? Who were when you were that age? Delia Smith and Escoffier?
Yeah,
was that it?
I mean, there was Delia, and there was the Good Food Show, wasn't
Yes.
there, with Chris whatever, and then Gilly Gordon, etc.
Yes.
And then, but you didn't. Your Marco Pierre White was the one in my college years. That was one coming forward.
Yeah.
But it was the Roux family. It was those real,
Yes.
French, bastions of French cookery. But food hadn't come to that.
Were you
level.
aware of them? Because this wasn't. They weren't on telly back in those days.
I mean, I was aware only if I read stuff. And again, I think it was only until I got into my after college and when reading about Marco Pierre White and then coming to work in London and seeing stuff that you suddenly started hearing about who these
Right.
and you bought the Good Food Guide and you looked up restaurants, but you think the Good Food Guide was probably an inch thick. Now it's probably 3-4 inches thick because restaurants have just exponentially doubled, tripled in number.
Did you eat out much when you were young? I haven't asked you
No,
that.
not well. We used to go to the local Chinese and Indian, but as a family, I ate out in Italy more
Right.
than I ever did in the UK. I ate out, I had the Indian with my mates. That was what we did, and Pizza Express. That was our other thing.
Yes.
That was the thing.
How does your palate develop then? When you were in Italy, would you know that you were eating something special? Would you know? Would you?
I think you do, yeah. I think what you appreciate is the simplicity. And whether you know that as a kid or whether you just remember it in later life, and I've still bang on about it today to bore everyone that you can't get a tomato for love nor money in this country as well as you can in Italy and Spain because we don't have the sun. Right. And I do remember moments that things like peaches and all those things that when they're in the height of season, you'll never eat anywhere else better. And there was one summer when I say we were shipped off, we'd gone to my mum's sister in Italy. And I remember her turning around, she goes, every time I look at you, there's another peach in your hand. I literally spent 2 weeks just stuffing my face with peaches because they were so delicious, So I think you do appreciate it. Of course you do. And we were lucky enough that we had a family that didn't go mad spending silly money, but bought smaller amounts than the best they could afford, in a way.
Of really good stuff.
Yeah.
The restaurant that you envisioned then when you first had notions of opening one of your own would have been like what would that
just
be?
a little local one in a high street. Well, if you think back to the days of
bottle on the table.
Yeah, literally. You think back to the days of not 40 Towers, but do you remember that episode where he goes to get a duck from his mate because they've got the inspectors in or something, or they're doing a gourmet night, aren't they?
Yeah.
It was that sort of thing in your local high street that's just a little restaurant and that's where you go to, I never thought, I'd be in London, running a chain of restaurants or anything like that.
They're still special if you can find one. There's nothing like, if you've got one, we've got one in our neighbourhood.
Nice.
Give him plug Daniel at La Rosetta in Brentford.
Lovely.
They've been there forever and they're full every night, isn't it? And you can see why.
And they know your family, they know you, they know the kid's birthday, that sort of thing.
And when you eat rocket, even that like a simple rocket and parmesan salad, it tastes different from the rocket that you buy in the supermarket.
Yeah.
So they've got the supplier and they've made the effort to establish the best quality ingredients that they can find. So then you go to Cambridge Poly to do modern history. So that was more of almost a social decision than a professional career one.
Yeah, but certainly it wasn't a professional career one. It was more a case of, if the cooking fails or whatever I fail, I've got something to fall back on. Not that I ever thought in my life I'd do anything academic.
Okay.
Or even to a degree something like you do. You know, at the end of the day, you've got to be very literal. You've got to, you know, your English has got to be good. You know, I'm just not like that sort of person. So I'd always probably been something more creative. But I did want to all my friends were going off to uni. My brother had just gone off to uni, so I thought, let's do this. So, and it was great. I never regret it. It's a bit like a
conveyor belt, really.
Yes,
and you had a nice time when you got there.
And also, we were a last generation that were free.
Yes.
You know, that was the other thing. You know, it didn't cost my mum for me to go off, and you continued your education.
Well, was education important to your mum? Was getting A-levels and a degree, did she have the kind of, you know, that's important?
I think it was, again, it follows on from that. You want better for your children than you had. Even though she had a good education, you want your kids to go off to university, you want them to do other things, and she's always said that. She goes, once you have kids and, you know, married or not, your whole mindset changes about how you want them to do better.
So you come out of Cambridge Poly, you've got your modern history degree in one hand and your chef's knives in the other.
Went down the road and started working in the local pub and restaurant.
Did you? At the Blue Boar, is that?
Yeah, so I worked at the Blue Boar.
What did you do, just walk in and ask for a job? Or?
At the time, my boyfriend was the manager there, so that's how I got the job. So
Nepo baby.
Yeah, Nepo baby. And then ended up working in another place, Free Press, which is a brilliant pub in Cambridge. And then ended up working for a guy who changed it quite dramatically, Hans Schweitzer at Midsummer House. And I started working for him, and then he was the one who sort of said, right, go off and go to Barbados, go and do some other stuff. And he was the one where I really started taking cooking seriously.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why? Tell me what he had that you wouldn't.
Well, it was a more serious restaurant for a start. You know,
still there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still there. It's run by a guy called Daniel Clifford, who's a brilliant chef. No, listen, the Free Press was brilliant, but it was wonderful pub food. But, you know, and there was nothing wrong with it, but it was great. The Blue Boar was just a party one. I mean, I'd be sending club sandwiches up in the lift to the managers and the waiters, and they'd be sending B-52s down. You know, we really were not running it to the best of our ability. You know, I remember being in the kitchen with flip-flops and shorts. I mean, health and safety. I mean, just there was no health and safety, but it was a great fun. And Kevin, who at the time was the manager, my partner at the time, Russell, worked for him. He got it right. He paid us all weekly on a Friday. And then by midnight on Friday, everyone's money was in the till again because we just all went up and spent it. But anyway, and it wasn't. Then when I went to Hans, it was a more serious restaurant, you know, and you know, it was a different way of working. You know, how you prep fish, you know, how you prep meat. I came in chef's whites for a start. You know, I wasn't in flip flops and t-shirts. And then I started thinking, right, if I'm going to do this, you need to care about it. And I did actually sign on to do a chef's course at Westminster College, and I was going to go one day a week. But then once I met Hans and he said, look, I'll teach you and stuff, I stuck with him for about 3 years, and that was great. It was brilliant.
What are the sort of big indicators of the difference then in what they call it fine dining now, don't they? I don't know how helpful
I don't know whether it's fine dining, but I think more that
but what you would call a proper restaurant.
Yeah, I think everything was brought in. So you didn't just get it, open a packet, here it comes out. You'd bring in the fish, you'd fillet it whole. All the vegetables were not raw, but they weren't out of a packet. They weren't pre-prepped. You made your sauces. We made the bread. You know, it was all those different things that takes time, takes talent, takes someone who knows what they're doing. And not that the Blue Boar was awful. It wasn't.
No,
it was still great.
Yes.
But it was a different market.
And how do you know if you're any good, Angela? How soon
trial
do you know?
and error, I suppose.
But and looking around and comparing yourself to other people.
I think one of my biggest skills, and to this day, or whether it's a skill or it's a characteristic, probably characteristic, I'm never afraid to say I don't know.
Right.
And I think if you're in a kitchen, the best thing you can ever do, especially with a new boss, is just go, I don't know, you teach me. And even if you know it or you've tried it with someone else, they're going to have their ways of doing stuff, and you just absorb. And I think that's what I was always good at. I absorbed and I wanted to learn.
And in the first instance, your bosses ability to decide whether you've got something a bit special or not is going to depend on how quickly you learn the thing that they're trying to teach you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think I was quite good and I was keen, and I think when you've got someone who wants to, and, if someone else was doing something else, I'd always be over there nosy. And, I loved eating. I loved food. I always have done.
That's got to help.
Of course it's got to help. So I always wanted to taste it. And even the other night we were doing a restaurant, we were laughing. I went to friends up in Scotland and we did a dinner with them. And James and I, he runs it, he's my mate. And he says, you're just like me, Angela. If we see food, we just stuff it in our mouth. And then my husband did this beautiful vegetable dish. And then there were these 2 little pickled cucumbers and little artichokes left on a tray, and I cleared them. And as I cleared them, I popped them in my mouth. And then after someone said, Neil says, "Oh, I'll do the dish up again. Where are those cucumbers? Where are those?" I said, "Oh yeah, sorry, gone." But and so when you love food, you want to learn. You're curious,
So it's incredibly hard work, and yet, in one sense, perhaps not work at all, because you sound like you're on a sort of quest for knowledge at the same time.
Yeah, and I think with hospitality, for the want of a bigger word, I think you've got to love people, and you've got to love and want to learn, and you've got to want to work with people, because I think that's your biggest challenge now more than ever. Skills factor, chef can come to me and be the best trained chef in the world. If you can't talk to a human being and have a management skills and manage people, then I don't need him or her. I need someone who can absolutely do the day-to-day. And I think that's where our industry's flipped on its head, rightly so, for the better. But I think when I was younger, I was just one of these people that would get my head down. And I was always a grafter.
Right.
I never, as I said earlier, I had a paper round, and then I had a Saturday job. And then when I was at college, I'd have a pub job and something. I always had jobs, and I always wanted to, because my mum didn't have loads of money. So if we wanted to earn money, we had to work. And so I think when you're a grafter in a kitchen, that always puts you in good stead as well.
And Hans was the first person who gave you, or saw something in you that possibly involved the seeds that
definitely
grow to where we are today.
He used to have a restaurant in Barbados, and he knew people out there, and he said to me, "There's an opportunity, why don't you see if you..." And that was a real punt on someone who hadn't only worked for him about 3 or 4 years. So I went to work in this hotel out there. He'd recommended me, and then after that I came back to the UK, and it was just at the rise of Gordon.
The decision to go to work in London, it was a one-day trial, I think, on the first day with Gordon Ramsay. Remind us, in 1994, what his status was. Was he a name? Had his name reached Barbados?
I don't know if it had reached Barbados, but it was starting to become a name in London. He was less than a year open. So that sort of, and he was just becoming the big name in London. Aubergine was sort of biting on the heels of Marco and the Roux brothers and Pierre Kaufmann, etc., and all these restaurants that had been established. And suddenly, and when I started working for Gordon, suddenly TV started to happen.
Right.
He was suddenly on the Good Food Show, and I think that was the beginning of it all happening. He was definitely known in the industry, because we had so many chefs come and eat there, and everyone wanted to eat there. But I don't know whether he was known as the wider audience, apart from people who were into their food.
And did you come back with a determination to work for him specifically, or would you have been quite happy to go and work at Gavroche?
I went for about 4 or 5 different trials, actually. I went to different restaurants, but I came back, and it was Gordon. I read an article in the Evening Standard, and I'd read it after I'd done my trial, and I remember specifically where I was. I was sitting in the French house, ironically, where my husband now runs. And I was up there with my uncle, and my sister was with me, and I said, "No, I want to work for him. That's who I want to work for," because I just couldn't believe his energy and how the kitchen was. It was a whirlwind, but it was amazing. And I looked at things. I thought, there was stuff I looked at, I didn't even know what they were, and I thought, that's where I want to work if I can manage it.
So here's the first sort of slightly cliched question. Well, it's probably the 15th, but I could...
I'm saying nothing, James. I love you, and I'll always be a listener.
So we mentioned that at home it was very much the role of the daughter to move into the kitchen. In professional kitchens, the woman stands out like a sore thumb. Certainly then. Why is that?
God, $1,000,000 question.
Isn't it?
Less so nowadays.
Yes, of course. But when you started,
but when I started, hours. It's got to be. Who the hell wanted to do the hours I were doing? I mean, and also with a little bit of shouting and swearing and all the rest
was
of
it?
it.
You say a little bit. I mean,
well, there was a lot for a lot of people,
Yeah.
not less so for me.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I was, and I've said it, and Gordon knows it. You know, I mean, we were working at 7 a.m. We were finishing around midnight.
Non-stop. I mean, you'd have a little.
You'd
lull
have a
between
little
service.
break in the morning.
Right.
You'd have, and then you'd have about an hour or so in the afternoon, and that was it. And then you'd carry
It
on.
flies a coach and horses
Yeah.
through every
Yeah.
law, doesn't
Yeah,
it? Every
yeah,
employment
totally,
law
yeah.
exemption.
And then, and we did that 5 days a week, and then on a Saturday we'd come in at 12. You know, that was not lying. And then we had Sunday off, and we weren't. You know, listen, other kitchens were doing exactly the same
course.
hours. It was the madness of it all, and France was doing the same, and everyone until the laws all changed. But you sort of were on that adrenaline ride, I suppose. You like doing it, you love doing it, and you know, and I managed those hours for about a year, and then after a year I said, Gordon, you know, I love you, I just can't do another year, it's killing me. And then went off to work, went to Italy. I went off to work with Giorgio in Italy, and then came back and worked for Gordon and the company. But I did love working for him. I've no regrets ever working for Gordon.
Is that a natural career path that you do a fixed amount of the mad hours?
Yeah.
And then if you're good, you'll take a slightly more supervisory position.
Yeah, I think a lot of other people stayed there longer with Gordon.
Right.
I obviously stayed with him longer on a long term
total, yes, sure.
yeah, but for that immediate, that was enough for me. And also I knew what I always, Gordon is still the same these days. He looks after people, and I saw that he would look after people who did their time for him. And that's what I wanted to do. I want to get to a stage where he cared for me enough to go, right, your career is now in my hands. And that's what he did. And, you know, and I suppose it was a bit of, I've proved myself, you know, I've done my year. If I need to do another 6 months, I'll do it. But
Right.
if I've done enough, and you're going to look after me. And that's sort of like how it worked, really.
Where's the satisfaction at this point, Angela? Where's because it sounds absolutely torturous to outsiders, and you know, and you obviously putting an amazing plate of food in somebody who's got the ability to tell you that it's an amazing plate. But what's the actual thrill? What's the actual addictive nature of?
The addictiveness was doing wonderful food. You loved it. You loved that, and you were. And at the time, we were in that period of that year or 18 months. We were the hottest restaurant in London, without doubt. Yeah. You know, people knew it, and
so it's like playing for Real Madrid.
Exactly. I mean, I still think today, and this is where I've got the most bizarre sense of humour. But you know, I remember one night going out to friends. And we'd gone to an opening, it was a Sunday night, and everyone said, you work at the Aubergine? That's like the Vietnam of kitchens, which to me I thought was hysterical. I just thought that was... And I came in the next day and started to tell Gordon, and I could see Marcus and other people looking at me going, where is she going with... Is she want to wind him up from the start of the week on a Monday morning? And I was just in hysterics about it. I said, they call it, you know, because to me, and that's where... What I did like is working for Gordon, because Gordon's only 2 years older than me. So it felt like... And because I had come a really weird way into his kitchen, I hadn't done my 3 years at college. I hadn't worked in any hotel kitchen, hadn't worked in any big kitchen. I came from these smaller kitchens, and I never knew the hierarchy that you wouldn't answer back. Not answer back, but you wouldn't say, well, actually, you know, and I remember one time Gordon said, well, who's made this? And I just went, well, it was him, you know, and of course everyone was like, what's she doing? You know, but Gordon liked that about me, that I would be a bit mad. So we got on well. And I think that's, and he certainly had a certain affection for me in that respect.
For the completely uninitiated, how does the hierarchy work? For people who don't realise, when you mention Marcus, you're talking about Marcus Waring. Yeah. So, sure. I mean, we all know who's at the very top of the pyramid.
Big G at the top of the pyramid. Then you had Marcus, who was the sous chef, who's the next in line. Then it was a guy called Mark Askew, who ran Gordon's Kitchens for years. He was the next in line. And then the rest of us were all chef de parties. Right. So we all ran sections. And there was me, Freddie, Damien, who was pastry chef, Ian Mappin, and I think that for a while there was just about 7 of us. And we all ran sections, you know, and that's how it works. So we were all equal. And then obviously some people were very skilled, and so I was probably better than Ian, not as good as Marcus and Freddie. You know, you knew where you were, you know, and but you did all work together as a team, you know. I think.
And are there moments of almost sort of transcendental happiness, where everything is. I use this quote so much. I've got to come up with a new one. But Douglas Adams, who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, said when it's going well, the writing, he said it's like throwing yourself at the floor and missing. And you're just sort of flying, and you're in this. And if you stop and notice that it's going so well, it'll slip out of your reach. But when everything is going perfectly, there's a sort of
it's like an orchestra.
Yes, exactly
it just
that.
works together. And Gordon, and there were loads of little tricks that again I laugh about now with him. He would never give you tickets. So you'd have to remember the order.
Okay.
But he'd have the orders in front of him, and I was on a section where I had to cut this, terrine or but I'd only ever use his knife, which was near him. So every time I'd run around, just get the knife, Gordon, and I'd be like peering over, just getting the knife, Gordon. All my little tricks to remember stuff. And, he goes, I remember admitting to him years ago when we went on, I said, Gordon, I used to hope one day that the place had got set fire to at the weekend or something had happened. I'd cycle up and it would just be in ashes and I wouldn't have to work for a week.
Because that's the mad
how your brain
adrenalised
works.
Almost state that you're in. But when you're in it, you need it. When you're out of it, you can't imagine.
No, exactly.
Journalism's a bit like that. Or at least when you've got a real bastard of a news editor.
Name and shame,
I'm
please.
not naming and shaming all this. I mentioned this on Radio 4 a few years ago, and I got a lovely message off a bloke saying it wasn't me, was it?
Oh, no!
But obviously, by the fact that he asked whether it was him or not, it was bound not to be him.
Of course.
But you love the work, and yet the stress levels can be... They don't make any sense to you when you're outside of the...
No,
I mean in your case, literally the kitchen.
No, and my mum, I remember one Easter, I was like, oh my God, I was just exhausted. My mum goes, why are you working there? Why don't you just leave? And all I said to her, I said, Mum, I just need to do a year. Let me do a year. Once I've done a year, then I know I've done my time and I can move on, and that was really key for me.
And when does creativity kick in, if it hasn't already? When do you, because you're describing very rigid and regimented restaurant kitchens.
Yeah.
When do you start thinking yourself, oh, that would go well with that, or a dish that is Angela Hartnett's dish? When does that happen?
I think that happened for me much later.
Really?
It certainly didn't happen in the Aubergine. That was Gordon's food, Gordon's style, and that's what I was there to learn and wanted to learn. It was later, I think, when I started working for Marcus, and then dishes would come on and we'd maybe collaborate together, and more when I became my own head chef.
Yes, of course.
And I think even then, you're still influenced by everything you've learnt. And you see that now with new head chefs that maybe have worked for Phil Howard for 3 years, or they've worked for Gordon, or they've worked for Thomas Parry, or Thomas, Tom Kerridge, or Nevis. You'll see influences of the chef because you can't help it.
No.
If you've trained under someone
like
for that.
fingerprints.
Yeah, in a way, And there's probably a similar with journalism. If you've worked for a left-wing journalist all your time or a left-wing newspaper, your political thinking is going to be very similar, isn't it? Otherwise, why are you there?
Yeah, or ballroom dancing. You can tell who the coach is. You can
exactly.
By the way they do their whatever, Paso Doble or something.
Oh, there you go. Are you saying you want Strictly coming?
No, God, no. Would you do it?
No.
No, why not?
No. Time more than anything.
Right.
I would do it. I was asked to do it, and I said I would do it because I think you'd be great for your physical. I'm of an age now when bending, I'm like, I need to start doing yoga, and you'd lose loads of weight. But I think you've got to give up like 4 months of your life. I just don't have that time at the moment.
And it's hardcore.
Yeah,
it's hardcore. So you went from the Aubergine to back. You went back to Italy. I didn't know that bit.
We basically, what I did was went to work for the company. We were all owned by a group called A to Z Restaurants, and Giorgio Locatelli was part of that group, running Zafferano. So I went to work for him for a bit, and then I went out to Italy because what I realised is, having worked for Gordon, loved all the French style, but wanted to really go back to the Italian. That's what I wanted to do.
Why?
Because I knew it and I liked it, and I think if you know it, you love it, and you're familiar with it, why try and do, for me, why try and do something else? So I stuck with that, and then went to work in a 2-star in it, a 3-star in Italy called Enoteca Pinchiore for about 6 months, and then came back to the UK, and then went back to working for Gordon, but under Marcus.
Okay.
And then stuck with him probably for quite a few years.
In the kitchen, then, there's no difference between a 1-star and a 3-star restaurant.
Quite a big difference.
How?
I think 1-star. Well, this is what I've always understood. 1-star is about consistency. That you go in and it's a consistent meal, service, etc. 2-star, I think you start to see the development of a chef. So if
Okay.
you went to Heston, probably when he was a 2-star, you would start to, and Heston's always a good example, you start to see his experimenting and having to eat parsnip cereal for dessert and all the rest of it. And then 3-star, you could do a blind tasting and know who that chef is. And I think if you look at who the 3 stars are, you could probably think that's true. That's the way I look at it, whether I'm right or wrong. But an inspector told me that once, so
That makes
I'm
sense.
hoping it, yeah.
But if you're working as a sous chef in the kitchen, is the experience different, or is the experience the same? Is the head chef still essentially insisting that you dance to the same sort of tune?
Yeah,
it's just what comes out at the end that's different.
I would say, yeah. I'd say
Okay.
the experience in the kitchen's the same, yeah.
Okay, so you're sous chef by the time you go to work for Marcus.
Yeah,
I
sous
think.
chef, yeah.
So that means that you are
I'm-
essentially second, or
Yeah, exactly. I'm running the kitchen in his absence, and yeah, and that was. I mean, in some respects, Marcus was harder than Gordon. You know, I always think so. I think Gordon could be termed as a pussycat sometimes compared to Marcus. He could be quite hardcore.
And even to you. And this is now at Petrus in Knightsbridge, I think.
No, Patrice in St James.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
And it's still living up to all your dreams, all your wildest.
Yeah,
You're
still
loving
doing it. Yeah, still love it. We have slightly more time off, which is good fun.
Yeah.
But harder because, you know, you're in charge. You've got the responsibility. So, you know, you're in charge of the restaurant. But again, I still like working for the company. I like working for Gordon. I like working for Marcus. I had opportunities. You know, as Gordon was getting bigger, we were expanding as a group. So, you know, suddenly, you know, I'd get a trip to Singapore with Gordon and I'd go and cook out there with him for 2 weeks. You know, all those sort of things. I'd go and cook for him at Ibrox in Glasgow. You know, so there's all those things because he was, and I'd worked for him for a long time. He would always say, well, I'll take Angela with me because she's going to be reliable. She's going to do it right. And that's what we want. So to me, it was a great experience, you know. And then eventually Gordon said, right, now as they started to expand, I was going to start running kitchens.
So you were head chef at Petrus, though, where you got a Michelin star. How big a deal is that to you?
I think that's massive. Yeah. I mean, it was Marcus's first star and the restaurant's first star, so it's huge. And the expectation was he had to get one,
Right.
and wanted to get one, and he got it phenomenally young. I think he was 27, Marcus, when he got it. So he was really, and it was a great kitchen, Patrice. And Marcus is a phenomenal chef.
And I mean, we haven't really talked about ambition. It's as if you knew what you wanted to do, and then that was refined into knowing where you wanted to do it and the sort of chef that you wanted to be.
Yeah.
But you're not, and everyone knows the importance of a Michelin star and the prestige that it brings, but you're not yourself making goals or targets.
No.
I want to be here by 1999, or
No.
I want to be doing this by 2002.
No, I wasn't. I was happily going along for the ride. You know, I'd bought a flat. You know, I was living in London. It was good fun. I still had loads of friends, all that. I wasn't thinking suddenly. Probably in my head, I was maybe going, I'd like my own restaurant one day. But I was still very much, I'm happy working for Gordon. You know, and I'm happy working for the company. And I knew under that company there'd been talks of, okay, when we get our next site, we might talk to Angela. You know,
Yes.
that. So things were happening, but at the time it was never like by 99, as you say, or 2000, whatever. That's what I want.
And it was 2001 that Amaryllis opened in Glasgow.
yeah.
What's your job now? Because David Dempsey ran the restaurant on a daily basis, but
I was just supporting him when he opened it up. It was just sort of a supporting role.
Okay.
Because again, you know, it's a big group, so you pull in people you know are going to help you. And so David was up there by him. It's not like we were around the corner. So if we're in London and we're all the restaurants next door,
well, exactly, yes.
you rang up, can you send me a chef de partie or a kitchen porter? I've run out of this. You're in Scotland. So what Gordon did, and that's what he was very good at, he would throw people at the restaurant they were opening and make sure. So I think I went up there for like 6 weeks just to
Okay,
help him.
okay.
Then another friend of mine, then Neil, went up, and we all did our time up.
So
to
he's
give him
deploying
support.
his people
Yeah.
in the best way
Yeah.
possible. And how's that for job satisfaction if you're not actually on a sort of permanent
Not the one
team?
in charge.
Yeah,
And for
well,
me-
A, not the one in charge, and
Yeah.
B, not there all the time, not having the chance to be part of the longer term evolution.
Yeah, true. I think for me, it suited me while I while we figured out where I was going, I suppose. But I liked it because it was doing something different.
Yeah.
It took you out of, not the monotony, but yeah, there is a level of monotony in restaurants. You're doing the same menu, peeling the same carrots, you're doing the same service. you know. So to go to a new city, experience something different, that to me was fun. So I love doing things like that.
So then you get your first kitchen is in Dubai, is it? Your first,
yeah.
So that is, I mean, evidence really of how big the empire was growing and how far it was spreading. But I think the kind of FA Cup final was the Connaught.
Yes,
it? Was
yeah,
when, so you come
sure.
back in 2002 and you open menu, and the grill room at the Connaught. That was by far the biggest challenge of your career so
huge,
far.
yeah, that was enormous, and it was brilliant, amazing to do. Quite very hard at first because one, it was this bastion of French male chefs, and then to bring in a woman who also was bringing in a bit of an Italian influence. Lots of customers were like, I'm never going back there. Gordon's ruining all these hotel restaurants, because he had Claridge's, the Connaught, then we did the Savoy. But actually, once we got our head round what the Connaught stood for, it turned out round and it was a brilliant restaurant. It was fantastic. Great customer base. A lot that still come to me today at Murano. And that's fantastic. But what I appreciated is people of habit there.
Right.
We used to do breakfast, lunch and dinner, and we had a great breakfast trade, but certain people would come the same day, every day. They'd have the same breakfast menu, the same paper, they'd sit on the same table. And I remember this one big Texan guy who used to come twice a year, because the Connaught's full of characters. Yeah. David Niven stayed, loads of people, it was amazing. And this guy said, he goes, Angela, when can I sit on table 35, which was always the best table in the house? And I said, I've got to be honest, when, the Lord dies, because when he dies, everyone moves up, but until, because that was his table.
Yeah, of course.
And I had customers say to me, when we left everything, when you open your new place, Angela, you've got to open it within 6 months, otherwise we're a habit once we go there. And that, it's a great thing about restaurants, I think.
And this is when more and more people started saying to you, why don't you open up on your own?
Yeah.
And you wanted to.
Yeah, I think by then, once we'd done the Connaught, then Gordon and I did Murano, and then I think it was after 18 months. Marcus had left by then, Jason had moved out on his own, and it felt like the right time. He sort of thought, come on, now I do it for myself. And Gordon was fully supportive of it. There was no big disagreement, no disruption. I bought Murano off him, and then, we moved forward. What
changes on the day-to-day when you become the sole owner?
Oh God, everything, I think, because there's no safety net.
Yeah.
If we'd had a bad month before at Murano, there was a head office that would still pay the salaries.
Oh yeah.
Bills all get paid. You'd pull on a restaurant that was making a bit more, and whatever, it was always there. Murano, we have a bad month, that's money out of my pocket that supports it. It's a very different thing.
And I mean, we're reaching the bit now where people know you. And when did that start happening? That's telly as.
Yeah, I think Gordon did that programme Hell's Kitchen, and that was the first time I did telly. And I hadn't. It was bizarrely, who was the woman? What, God, Edwina Curry, that was her. She was on it. Yeah, that will make you smile. And it was her that said to me, things will change now. I said, what are you on about? And she said, no, now you're on telly, people and journalists. And really, I never knew it till after. We did 2 weeks of Hell's Kitchen. Some journalists had turned up at my mum's house. I don't know how. Yeah, they turned up there and basically wanted to try and imply something was going on with me and Gordon. They were trying to find something.
Absolute bastard.
And my mum, being my mum, was just like totally over, totally didn't give it the time of day, and just a cup of tea and just showed them pictures of my nephew, and that was it. And but they were ringing round restaurants trying to find something, and then the restaurant world, being what it was, called Chris, called Gordon, and they said, because it's just, bizarre.
Batten down the hatches.
Yeah, batten it down. It's like ridiculous.
Put up the shutters.
Yeah.
At what point then, up until this moment when you kind of became your own boss, at what point, if any, did you come close to messing up?
Ooh, I think the one thing for me was when we opened Covent Garden was the hard one. We did Murano and we just carried on, and that's always worked, and it's a solid business. You do the covers, you keep the right team, it works, it ticks the boxes.
So Covent Garden is Cafe Murano.
Yeah,
It's the sort
and then
of-
we did St James Cafe Murano, which
Yeah.
went phenomenally well. And then there was probably a bit, if I'm honest, a bit of hubris when we did Covent Garden. We thought,
we've done this.
we've done it, let's just take it, put it there, and not realising that Covent Garden, even though London to a degree is small, it's not New York, Covent Garden is a very different beast from St James.
Yes,
and that was a massive learning curve. And since then, and it woke me up to, you can't just sort of, take cookie cutter and think it's going to work. You've got to understand pre-theatre, different audience, different spend per
just
head.
thinking that. I mean, you can walk between one and the other. In fact, I have, because I had lunch booked at the one in St James, and I was supposed to be at the one at Covent Garden.
Oh, right, there you go.
So I know exactly where.
Lots of people do
I know
that.
exactly how close to each other they are.
Yeah.
And yet, as you say, the clientele is completely different.
Yeah. And it's
that's really relevant to what
relevant and much more price conscious, especially when we're and also look what's around you, the theatres, kids friendly, there's so many things different. So that was a huge learning curve. And then I think the biggest thing, as probably every restaurateur or any chef you've spoken to in the last 3-4 years, has been Brexit and COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been the whoof.
Yeah.
I've never felt more stress in my life after COVID. But
well, you did some pretty magic stuff during COVID, didn't you? I don't know how widely known it is. Tell us a bit about what you and Lulu Dylan did then.
Oh, so Lulu is a good mate of mine. Social media, for all its faults, occasionally has good things on it. And I saw her sister posted a picture and she said, Lulu, my mate, cooking for doctors of the NHS. Lulu had some friends who worked and she said, I'll make you supper and I'll make you meals and I'll do your shopping. And I called her up and said, well, I'll give you a hand, Lulu. I've got nothing to do, blah, blah, blah. And so her dad, bless him, Mike, would drive from Beaconsfield all the way to East London. I would put the food on the doorstep. I'd walk in the house, shut the door, he'd pick it up, because we didn't know. We were doing all those crazy rules that we didn't realise. And then we started doing a bit more, and Lulu was suddenly, from going to 5 friends who then would help say, would you do it for other people? We got to 15 and 20. And then another great friend, Greg Lawson, who owns Smart Hospitality, he'd call me up and said, what are you doing? What's going on? I've got these kitchens, I'm doing nothing. Is there anything you're doing? I said, well, actually, Greg, hold on. And then we realised, and basically Lulu then ended up getting in touch with all these IC, intensive care units, and committed to us cooking for all the doctors and nurses every day, the whole way through the first wave of the pandemic. And we basically would be teams at Smart, and she got mates. We had, different people everyone had a role. I'd cook. Other people were drivers, other people were packagers, and you just did that same role your 2 days that week because no one crossed over. And it was brilliant, and then loads of other restaurants got involved. Hawksmoor were Hacker, everyone did their bit, and it was fantastic.
And you were doing 1,000 meals a day?
Yeah, we were, it was crazy at one stage.
So it's a sort of mad little side.
I know. And when you sort of think about it, I remember afterwards, because we'd pack it in plastic. And I go, oh my God, Laurie, we've got to keep this plastic. We should ask for them back. And she looked at me, she goes, yeah, in a pandemic that's being spread by a virus, you want to bring all that packaging back?
God, yeah.
And I was like, yeah, of course. You just don't think of things. But what they weren't getting was a hot meal. And then after the second wave, I think by then the hospitals had got their act together. They knew how to react, and that's how it worked.
And then, so speaking of sort of side projects, there's the 3 cookbooks. Hell's Kitchen was followed by other, the Great British Menu, BBC's Best Home Cook with Mary Berry, and then you're now spread quite thinly. I mean, how do you find the juggling, the spinning of the plates, and also the management and the owning, rather than just going into a kitchen and cooking every day?
So for me, I worry more, if I'm absolutely honest, about Murano more
than everything else.
Yeah, because that is the thing that underpins everything.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to lose a star at Murano. That to me is, as you say, you've said it right, underpins everything else. The cafes are brilliant, but there's a great team there that's their job to look after it. I oversee the menu, but it's not my job to go and cook in those cafes. They need to deal with that, and they do it very well. And then I do the TV I like to do. You know,
Yeah.
people think you're on it a lot because there's a lot of repeats on TV.
It's very true, especially food
You know,
programs.
oh
more
God,
than
it's
anything else, isn't
ridiculous.
it?
You know, people, you know, that Venice programme I did with Fred's been repeated about 5 times. I think everyone thinks I'm in Venice every weekend. And it's just not, you know. And so I think people think I'm a lot busier and doing a lot more. And it's like the podcast, because it comes out every week, people think, oh, you're on there every week. But actually, we film it in 2 days and it's done.
Okay.
You know, I'm very efficient with my time.
Yeah, well, clearly. Well, which is something you learn in a kitchen.
I think you have
isn't
to
it?
be,
I mean,
and you know, and I've, you know, the first time we did it all, I didn't want it to. It was suddenly taken, and if anything becomes too big to take over from what I want to do at Murano, then I generally say no to it. It's got to work.
And how long will that be true for? Do you think? I mean, do you have?
I'd like to. I'd love to get to a stage where Murano, I've got a chef and a manager that I say to them, you know what, here's 50% of the business or 40, whatever it is. You run it, it's yours. I'll just take a back seat. And I think if the cafes just do their thing and maybe we sell them one day. But yeah, I mean, everyone always says when you're people that work hard, I don't know whether people say it to you, James, you'll never retire. And I'm like, God, are you kidding me? I would retire.
What do you see yourself doing when
Nothing.
you do?
Just, you know, walk the dogs on a beach. No, I love a holiday. You know, I tell you what I'd love to do is take like 3 years out and just travel the world and just go and eat everywhere and actually live in somewhere, like go and live 4 weeks in Paris. Go and live, you know.
It's properly stuck in.
And and then you go to a market and you cook and all the rest of it, and then you just go. So yeah, I would happily retire. Not sure, maybe who knows when, but sometime, yeah.
But there's no ambition left then, really. You've got your restaurant, you've got your star. There
may be some more projects.
Sure, but there's nothing that you think is unfinished business.
No, I don't think, you know, I've never been someone who wants my own TV programme. It's not my thing. I love doing the podcast, and if great things come up and maybe I do something with Nick on TV, who knows, but it's got to feel right. And so far, Woods, whatever, it's more gut than anything that drives that I sort of think that's a good idea. If that sounds pants, I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it.
The Nick you referred to is Nick Grimshaw.
Mr.
The podcast
Grimshaw.
is Dish from Waitrose. What do you like about doing that? Well, tell people what it is first, who haven't listened to it, and then tell me what you like about it so much.
So it's basically coming round to dinner at Nick's and mine, but you're in a studio with 10 other people, and there's a wooden table, the dish table as we call it. I cook you some food, Nick and I interview you. He does the majority of the interviewing because that's his thing, and we have a lovely conversation, and it's not there, much like yours, it's not there to catch anyone out.
Sure.
We're not there to trip anyone out, and I think the food element and the drink element, whether it's alcoholic or not, relaxes people and everyone has fun, and we've yet to have anyone not like it, and they all go, this is such a laugh, this is such fun, and we get some great guests. You know, we've really had some brilliant people, and everyone loves food.
And you've come full circle, really, because really near the beginning you talked about how important it is to get on with people and to be interested in people. And that's why this has perhaps been your most satisfying of the media projects that you've done, or certainly up there.
Yeah, I think so. It's done phenomenally well. It works well.
You're
also
up to season 5, aren't you now?
Yeah, because Nick and I get on well, and I think that's the key. And neither of us take ourselves too seriously.
Yes.
And I think we have a good fun, and he'll take the mickey out of me, I take the mickey out of him. But and you know, and we enjoy being in each other's company. But we are very different. You know, I'm like, this is a job as much. Let's get out of here. Let's do this and get out.
Do you know quite quickly, like you mentioned doing the show with Fred, Sirius, do you know quite quickly if you gel, if you like as a TV thing? Is it like being in a kitchen? Is it?
I think there's an element.
Can't rub up against each other.
No, and I think, you know, Fred, I think is brilliant because he's and Fred turns it on.
Yes.
I mean, he's if you've met him, he'll come in here, the energy, like he's exhausting, but I know him enough to go, Fred, turn it down a notch.
Exactly.
Get out of my face.
He's lovely.
And he's brilliant, and he'll take it, and he'll just walk up and go, oh, she's in a mood. And I'm like, no, you're just driving me insane. Go away. And a bit like Nick, I'm like, right, I just need 5 minutes, you know. So you need those characters, but you also need to be able to say to them, just woof, simmer.
It's a good list of people that you've had on. Have you got a dream guest? Have you got someone sort of that would?
I don't know whether I'd want him on because I'd love to meet him, Larry David. Yeah. But I'm not sure I'd have the courage to interview him. It'd scare me because he's so quick and brilliant. And I'd love him and Jerry Simon. I mean, everyone says, do I watch cookery shows? I watch comedy. I love comedy shows. And Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm. Any comedian I sort of love. So I'd love maybe Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Yeah.
Maybe she'd be the one. She'd be brilliant.
It's a lovely list of guests. Do you know who you've got coming up on the because you've had Kirsty Young, Miriam Margolyes, Gordon Ramsay. Surprised he said yes.
Yeah, he did.
Flourish Pugh.
Yeah, we've just done. We just did last week. We did Dua Lipa. She was amazing. So yeah, no, we've got loads of. We've had great guests and we've got loads coming on. It's brilliant.
So you're just still loving it.
Yeah,
still
loving it. Still
ticking along quite nicely.
No
more boxes left to tick.
No, thank you for having us.
Jobs chosen according to what you enjoy and what you think you're quite fancy doing.
So, yeah.
And the freedom to walk away if you don't. Angela Hartnett, thank you.
Thank you.